Hello, my name is Ian and I'm a tutor at Chegg. Today we're going to be talking about the price elasticity of demand and the price elasticity of supply. So, what the heck are these things? The price elasticity of demand is the percent change in quantity demanded to the percent change in price as we move along the demand curve. The price elasticity of supply is basically the same thing. So, the percent change in quantity supplied to the percent change in prices as we move along the supply curve. As you can see below that, I have two other definitions, perfectly inelastic and perfectly elastic. So, when a curve is perfectly elastic, it will be vertical. This means that the price elasticity is zero, so the price changes for the good do not have an effect on the quantity supplied. If that makes you a little bit lost, don't worry, I'll be showing you a graph for that and perfectly elastic. So for perfectly elastic, it will always be a horizontal line. If the quantity supplied is zero below some price and infinite above the price. So that's great. Okay, what does that mean exactly? That sounds like a bunch of gibberish. So this is what that means visually. So this here is perfectly inelastic. I have it labeled as a supply curve in both cases, but if you have a demand curve that is perfectly elastic or perfectly inelastic, it will look exactly the same and follow these same rules. So as stated, if something is perfectly inelastic, an increase or a decrease in price leaves the quantity supplied unchanged. So no matter how much or how little you pay or charge for the price, people will still only demand 100 units of it. That means you could charge a penny, people will still only want 100 units. You could charge millions of dollars, billions, and people will still only want 100 units. On the other extreme scale is perfectly elastic. As you can see, it is a horizontal line. At $15 or above, producers will produce any quantity. So no matter how much people want, they will just keep on making them forever and ever and ever, as long as it's $15 or above in this case. Whatever this line is, they will always produce any quantity at or above that price. Similarly, if you drop below the price, so in this case, if you went to $14.99, immediately the quantity supplied will be zero. Kind of odd, right? Doesn't seem very realistic, but that's because these are both theoretical models. It's very highly unlikely there is any good out there that is perfectly inelastic or perfectly elastic. However, knowing what these are will make it a little easier for you to understand how to identify if a curve is more elastic or more inelastic compared to other curves. And I know I found these to be extremely confusing when I first went through my microeconomics class. So I have a nice little way that might help you remember. So most people wear underwear, and underwear are elastic. And usually when you take them out of your drawer, you'll hold them and then you'll pull them up, put them on. So it's horizontal when you hold it, right? And it's also stretchy. So if it's horizontal, that means it's elastic, just like the underwear you take out of your drawer. And the reason why I say it's stretchy is because when we get to calculating elasticity, if your elasticity of supply, in this case, is greater than 1, that means it is elastic. And then the way I remembered perfectly inelastic, granted it's a little bit flawed, is I would think of a tree. A tree is vertical most of the time, and it can't move, so it can move in less than one direction. And when you're calculating elasticity, if it's less than 1, then it is perfectly inelastic. Then there's another type of elasticity called unit elastic. I don't have it shown here, nor anywhere else where I have graphs set up. But basically, that means the price elasticity is equal to 0, and this is actually a good place to move on to the price effect and quantity effect, because if something is unit elastic, that means that the price effect and the quantity effect are even. So therefore, going back to that revenue example I gave you before, if you increase the price, revenue will remain the same because the quantity effect will be the same as the price effect. So, to visually show you what I was talking about with those examples, inelastic, if the price effect is greater than the quantity effect, then you have an inelastic line. And then similarly, if you have a price effect that is less than the quantity effect, you have an elastic line. And I highly recommend trying to remember this part here, because that will make your life so much easier when you need to identify if something is perfectly elastic or inelastic if you're just shown two lines and your teacher specifies you're not allowed to calculate it. Another way to remember is that your perfectly elastic is horizontal. So the more horizontal a line is compared to others, that would mean that line is more elastic than the line that is less horizontal. Similarly, if you're asked which line is more inelastic, whatever one is more vertical will be more inelastic than the one that is less vertical. So let's move on to a little bit of calculation. So the following is one of two ways I'm going to show you how to calculate the price elasticity. So there is a slight difference in how you calculate the quantity for demand and the quantity for supply. I don't have it noted here, but the difference for demand is that this first number, the change in quantity demanded, it will always be negative, and that is because a demand curve is downward sloping. But I'll get more into that once we calculate one for a demand curve. So the first thing to calculate price elasticity is you either have to calculate the percentage change in quantity demanded or quantity supplied, and then the percentage change in price. So to calculate the percentage change in quantity demanded or quantity supplied, you have to have your change in quantity demanded over the initial quantity demanded, and then multiply that whole fraction by 100. Similarly, when you're calculating the percentage change in price, you have the change in price over the initial price and multiply that whole entire fraction by 100. And then your price elasticity of demand, you take these two numbers, specifically the percentage change in quantity demanded or quantity supplied, over the percentage change in price. So, as I already stated, but it doesn't hurt to reiterate this, when the price elasticity is greater than 1, demand is elastic. When the price elasticity is less than 1, demand is inelastic. When the price elasticity equals 1, demand is uninelastic. When the price elasticity is infinite, demand is perfectly elastic. And when the price elasticity is 0, demand is perfectly inelastic. So let's move on to an applied example of calculating the price elasticity of demand. In this particular case, we are dealing with a demand curve. So earlier in the video, you might remember me stating that when you're calculating demand, you have a negative point here. So again, I don't have that actually written in the formula here, but there is a very specific reason why later down I drop the negative. So due to the nature of demand, it has a negative relationship with price. So this means if your price goes up, there's going to be less quantity demanded. If the price goes down, there's going to be more quantity demanded. So us economists, we're lazy, so we just drop the negative and we take the absolute value of the quantity demanded. We know that the elasticity will always be negative due to the fact that this is a demand curve. But let's get on to actually calculating it now that you know why I drop the negative later in this section. So we start with our percent change in quantity demanded. To do that, first we need to have our change in quantity demanded. I don't have that specified here, so let's change that real quick. Initially, we have 10 units of a good, and it is being charged for $10. So that means our change from 10 to 8 is -2. Our initial quantity demanded was 10 units. So -2 divided by 10 will give us -0.2. We multiply that by 100 and we will get -20%. So then next step, to get our price elasticity of demand, we must calculate our percent change, which is what this triangle means if you didn't know that from up here, in price. So we have our change in price, which is a $5 change from 10 to 15, divided by the initial price, which is 10. We then multiply that by 100. So 0.5 times 100 gives us 50%. Our price elasticity of demand will then be our change in quantity demanded, so this first calculation we got, divided by our percent change in price. For here, if you include the negative, you will end up getting -0.4. But since we want the absolute value, we omit the negative, and we will come up with just +0.4. And since it's less than 1, what does that mean this curve is? It means it is inelastic. So let's try one more example. In this one, I am going to be introducing the midpoint method, which is the second of the two methods that I will be teaching you today. So the midpoint method is essentially the same as the one I just told you, except there's a slight difference. So the percent change in x, that's our x-axis here. You calculate your percent change divided by the average value of x times 100. And this average value of x, you can calculate that by adding the starting value of x with the final value of x and dividing it by 2. So let's start with our percent change in x. So from 1,100 to 1,300, that is a change of 200. Our starting value of x was 1,100, and our final value is 1,300. We then divide that by 2. So we get 2,400 divided by 2, which just gives us 1,200. So 200 divided by 1,200 gives us 0.167. If we multiply that by 100, we get a percent change in x of 16.67%. The percent change in price is done in exactly the same way, but with price. So even though the answer is right there, how about you try to calculate it and see if you come up with the same answer as me? So our change in price is 0.20 or 20 cents because we start at 90 cents and move up to $1.10. And then we have to add our starting value of x, 90 cents, plus our final value of x, $1.10, and divide that by 2. After you divide it by 2, we get 0.2 divided by 1. Anything divided by 1 is equal to itself, so we get 0.2 times 100. That gives us 20%. So price elasticity, if you remember, is the percent change in quantity demanded over the percent change in price. So that'll give us 16.67 divided by 20, which is 0.8333. It's less than 1. What does that mean the price elasticity of supply is for this particular good? It means that it is inelastic. Hopefully this video has made elasticity a little more clear to you. It is a very abstract and somewhat hard to understand topic. It took me quite a while to understand it myself. So I hope my presentation and my tips made it just a little bit easier for you. And best of luck.